Well, good evening, Information Nation. Welcome to another episode of What Nobody Told Me After 65. Well, I'm your host, the lady on the go, lady in the know, Miss Info. You have reached the Information Nation, where knowledge is shared and wisdom exchanged for the betterment of a people. Welcome! I promised you a video. It's late. I've been working on it. Halfway pleased with it. I'm gonna upload it and let's talk about it. This particular video is centered around the notion that you can build a better person through proper breeding. And the term that I was looking for the other night was eugenics. That's what we're going to talk about today, eugenics. All right, stay tuned. So I remember when I was a young girl about my grandmother telling me about stories of young black women who were involuntarily sterilized in the South, and some of the ways that they tricked them into being sterilized. And that story always intrigued me. Many years later, I heard about a program that was operating in the U.S. Where they administered to their own people, very much like the Nazis did in Auschwitz and the Holocaust camps. They forced their own people to undergo sterilization under the guise that they were unfit, undesirables. Hold on. So they called them feeble-minded morons, idiots, not fit to live. You have to remember, this was the early 20th century. America was developing their superpower superiority complex, if you will. This was after World War I, which World War I was 1914 to 1918, and we entered into World War II in 1939. Now, this eugenics, which is the science of regulating population through controlled breeding, that is the scientific term for eugenics. Eugenics was started somewhere around 1920. Yeah, around 1920, and it didn't end until 1970 officially. 50 years it was on the books. Now, whether they were continuing to practice it, I'm not so certain. However, I do have evidence of a company, of a foundation, or an organization that still believes in euthanasia. And they've been around since 1991. So I think it's interesting to note here that I thought we got the sterilization, involuntary sterilization practice from the Nazis. Nope, they got it from us. Apparently, a gentleman by the name of Harry Laughlin, Laughlin, he was an American, and he had been coordinating and discussing eugenics with German scientists. Harry Laughlin was also the keeper of the eugenics record office from 1910 to 1939. He was the director where they kept all the records. Um, by anybody's estimate, there were about 60,000 Americans sterilized between 1920 and until 1970. So perhaps they were still operating and doing involuntary sterilizations right up until the program ended in 1970. Here's another interesting note. Hitler came into power in July of 1933. 5 months after he came into power, he introduced the sterilization program. Guess where he read about it? In prison. While he was in prison in 1924, he was reading a document that was written by an American on sterilization, eugenics. He read that book in prison. He also mentioned that book in his book, Mein Kampf. Hitler moved from sterilization to extermination. And I don't know when the U.S. Finally decided that involuntary sterilization was against the laws of nature. I don't know if it was when Hitler started the gas chambers. I'm not quite sure. However, I have two young women that I want to tell you about who were products of involuntary sterilization. Two white women from completely different ends of the spectrum. One very poor white trash, quote unquote, and the other one a very wealthy white heiress. I'm going to talk to you about them in a few minutes. So, let me tell you about the first young woman. Her name was Carrie Buck. I think I still have her biographical information pulled up here on the computer. But Carrie Buck was a white girl, and she lived in the state of Virginia, which happened to be the first state to order involuntary sterilization, or what they called compulsory sterilization. And you know why? She was chosen because she was considered to be feeble-minded. Her mother had her as a young woman. She was married, but soon after she got married and got pregnant, her husband left her. And she had these children, one of whom was Carrie Buck. And again, when you talk about trailer park folks at the time, poor white trash, she fit that description. Now, you again have to know that we were also in an era of immigration. Large influxes of people were coming into New York. Bring us your tired, your poor, your coming into Ellis Island. However, people here in the U.S. felt threatened by the influx of these immigrants. And 32 states at the time when we were having all these immigrants coming in had passed sterilization laws where people could be sterilized against their will or without their knowledge. Primarily because Harry Laughlin and another scientist from Great Britain named Galton, Galton, said that if you allowed these immigrants to come in and breed with our people, with Americans, we didn't know what we would get. They would be considered unfit, morons, imbeciles. What else? Idiots. And so, this Galton guy, he was considered as a polymath. A polymath is a person who has knowledge of a vast array of subjects. He just knows a lot of stuff. A polymath. And in the U.S., we had a polymath. We probably had more polymaths than I looked up, but Benjamin Franklin was considered a polymath. Very knowledgeable, scientific minds. They were the creme de la creme. So if you as a polymath said something was right, everybody listened to you and followed you. So Galton and my friend Harry Laughlin were in correspondence with one another. Galton was very impressed with Harry Laughlin and vice versa. Now, 1933, when Hitler came into power, Germany was performing 5,000 sterilizations a month. 5,000 sterilizations a month. And eventually, instead of sterilizing them, he killed them. He murdered them. When it first started out, he called it population re-engineering. Fancy word. Fancy words. Don't be fooled by fancy words. So, here we have Carrie Buck. And in 1924, she was arrested because she got raped by her foster parents' nephew, had a baby, and while she was in jail, after she had the baby, they performed sterilization on her. The foster parents took her baby and raised her, but apparently she died at the age of 8 from measles. She contracted measles and died. But by all accounts, she was very smart, very energetic, didn't show any signs of being feeble-minded or moronic or an imbecile. Carrie Buck died. When did she die? Hold on, I'll find that out. Okay, so Carrie Buck was born in 1906. She died in 1983. She lived to be 76 years old. She was married twice. but she had no other children. Of course, she'd been sterilized. Her little girl lived to be 8 years old. Her name was Vivian Dobbs. Now, they don't talk much more about Carrie Buck, but she was the first one, and the first one in the state of Virginia to be ordered to undergo compulsory sterilization. That was in 1924. Now, let's go to Anne C. Hewitt on the very other end of the spectrum. She was a wealthy white heiress. Her father was an engineer, an electrician or something. And in 1936, she sued her mother and the doctors for involuntary sterilization. She had appendicitis. When she went to the hospital, her mother paid the doctors to sterilize her daughter under the guise she was a high-grade moron. Now, truth of the matter is, Anne Cooper Hewitt's father was very wealthy, and he left his inheritance to his daughter 2/3 and his wife 1/3. And the 2/3 would go to the wife if Anne died without any children. So, the first thing the mom did was have her daughter sterilized. But she had to do it. There were laws on the books. She had to do it if she wasn't undesirable or unfit. Now, this was in 1936. 10 years, almost 10 years, after the Carrie Buck fiasco. Now, when Anne Hewitt was young, I don't know, 5 years old or something, they said she was caught masturbating. Actually, she was touching herself. She had her hands down her pants or something. And from then on, she was perceived as feeble-minded and promiscuous. So, she never caught a break. She didn't get pregnant before she was of age. In 1936, she was, 1936, she was at least about to come into her fortune. And I don't know if she was 18 at that time. But that's a long time for you to have that label on you. And mind you, she wasn't trash. She wasn't poor. She had money. She sued for $500,000. The charges were eventually dropped because involuntary sterilization or compulsory sterilization was on the books as law in the state of California. That's where she was. So she ended up settling for $150,000. In 1939, her mother died from a stroke at age 55, and Anne wound up marrying 5 times. Just like her mother was married for 5 times, and she died from cancer at the age of 40 in 1956. Now, here's another side note. In 1911, this was before Anne Hewitt and also before Carrie Buck. 1911, there was a report done at the Carnegie Institute that explored 18 methods for removing defective genetic attributes. Manslaughter. Involuntary sterilization was one of them. But the eighth method was euthanasia. The suggested method to euthanize individuals was via the gas chamber. Now, this is in 1911. But here in America, the doctors here came up with more subtle ways to euthanize their patients. One mental institute in Illinois fed their patients milk infected with tuberculosis, resulting in a 30 to 40% death rate annually. Because these people were undesirable because they were in a mental institution, so you could just kill them, do away with them. Their reasoning was that if you were genetically superior, you could resist the disease. Really. Retarded. In 1931, now this is after Carey and before Ann Hewitt, we had something called the Homeopathic Medicine Association. They lobbied for the right to euthanize imbeciles and other quote-unquote defectives. In 1938, the Euthanasia Society of America was founded, and is still around. It was renamed in 1991 Choice in Dying. However, when I looked it up, it did not have a legal business or nonprofit entity name when I did a Google search. The only thing I could find was an organization called Compassion and Choices. I believe that they're one and the same. Compassion and Choices. Listen, I'm going to have to put this video all together. I've been stopping and starting, and I'm just not myself, but I'm getting there. And I know you're asking, what in the world are you doing a video about euthanasia, eugenics? Because we may be headed that way. Look at some of the things that are happening in the nation. People are being killed simply because. The man that set the lady on fire in New York said he don't remember it. He don't remember doing it. But at the time, they said he was just sitting there looking at her because she was homeless, wrapped up in a blanket. That's probably what really hastened the fire. She was wrapped in some kind of flammable material. She was an undesirable. There have been bombings of mosques and Jewish synagogues. People being killed because of their color, their race, their beliefs. Yeah. I had to take a look at this. Eugenics. And like I said, right up until 1970, it was still at least on the books. If I get time before I finish this video, before I upload it, I'm going to check and see when eugenics actually became, no longer was law. Because 32 states had sterilization laws on the books in the 1930s. 32 states. So, hold on. I'm going to give you some additional information. I'm going to wrap this up, and then we'll get together again tomorrow. All right. Take care. Well, it is late, but to wrap this up, I find that history repeats itself if we do not heed the lessons learned. What have we learned? That dictatorship is never far behind any narcissistic rhetoric and calloused imperialist sanctioned agendas. Usually, dictatorship is right around the corner. So we should be watching for the signs that millions missed before the Holocaust. If we do not take notice, history will repeat itself. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. You know the drill. And remember, you don't know what you don't know. Take care.